On June 13th, 2019, something crazy happened. Beating the Golden State Warriors 114 to 110, the Toronto Raptors won their first NBA championship. Not only was this the first win for the Raptors since their creation in 1995, but it was the first major North American sports championship win for Canada in 25 years.
It goes on and on and on. Everybody is here waiting and watching, hoping to get a little glimpse of their favorite player.
To say that people were overjoyed would be an understatement. For the Raptors' home province of Ontario, the excitement of the win permeated in the public culture for almost a year straight. Be it attire, flags on cars, or people saying "Kawhi" every time they threw something in a bin, basketball found its way out of a subculture sport into what people could easily relate to in conversation with contagious enthusiasm. In 2019, I wasn't a basketball fan, nor was I really a sports fan. But from the osmosis of secondhand conversations while working at a restaurant, or the excited sharing of students while online teaching in 2020, I decided to approach the world of basketball in a method that I understood very well. For many, gaming is a primary hobby, and yet when presented with sports games, they seem to turn their nose up to the genre almost on principle. With limited experience with doing a lot of cooperative sports, and lack of understanding of the depth of the games and players, I was that person as well. However, coming in with an open mind, I popped in a used copy of NBA 2K20 into my Switch, and really enjoyed the time I had. Perhaps at first it was the novelty of wanting to learn, but my aspiration to get better and figure out why people liked it kept me playing far after the curiosity phase had expired. I slowly but surely started to appreciate the strategy, teams, and even story of what the game had to offer, and this made me more open to understand and appreciate, to the point where I went out and bought an actual basketball and would go out to a court after work to start getting better. While I certainly couldn't expect such a transformation from my friends, my excitement to other gamers usually was replied with, "Yeah, but it's always the same and the microtransactions are egregious." While this comment has more than one grain of truth, it dismisses them wholesale and discounts the history and fidelity of where sports games came from and how they attempt to simulate the feeling of a sport, physical or otherwise. The great thing about looking at something with different eyes is that hopefully you're more appreciative to the things that you may have never considered. For me, there's a trove of sports games that I never thought I would enjoy, and now suddenly found myself drawn to. I knew about the significance of some of these games, but I want to personally know why they're so important to sports game fans. So I made it my mission to search out for the best basketball games of different eras, and see how they hold up, and how new sports fans can learn to play and appreciate them. If you don't play sports games, I hope that this video might nudge your perspective a little bit, to look at a genre or a sport that you don't have a lot of experience in, and see why it might be fun to try out. If you do play sports games, hopefully this might be a little bit entertaining to see what a newcomer appreciates. I won't be going through all aspects of every game covered, but I'll mainly be looking at them from the way that best suits a general impression to someone learning to enjoy them. I'm not a scholar in basketball, nor am I competent enough to even hold my own at a rec center pickup game, but I enjoy video games, and sometimes that's a good enough entry point to learn to love a sport. To start things off, I looked into what gave the closest impression to the sport from its earliest adaptations. There are, of course, multiple places where these can be found. NBA basketball for the Intellivision was a contender, with multiple players and a good adaptation of the court. Dr. J vs. Bird was an important early EA title for multi-platform nature, creating a prominent impact. I was also tempted with Ultimate Basketball with its showmanship. But when I think of a basketball game that defined the consoles, Double Dribble for the Nintendo Entertainment System fits that title most accurately. Double Dribble not only is a great fast-paced 5-on-5 title, but it also shines in terms of presentation on the NES. In the early years of the console's history, it used valuable resources on the cartridge to make the presentation sing all the more sweet. To show fans flock to the stadium, a halftime show, and close-ups of a dunk all work to give you this feeling of watching a professional game. Other than some rather unforgiving out-of-bounds moments, and a corner 3 glitch that shall not be used, the gameplay is incredibly easy to pick up and play, but still very thorough for features of a basketball game at the time. For the past few years now that I've played sports games, I've used them as good secondary companions to accompany the larger, meatier games that I play. As someone getting used to sports games, it's a method I use to casually test the waters, while also not leaning so heavily on them that I would miss other titles I love. If I'm cycling through playthroughs of retro games like Zelda, this game will also find its way through the rotation for a pleasant half-hour to hour bursts, and add it to a repertoire of enjoyable titles. It doesn't have seasons, official teams, or unique players, but in spite of all this, it's a quaint, simple starter. It's easy to understand, a solid multiplayer title for the NES, and the razzle-dazzle and charm make for a game that I would argue still gives you a taste of a quick-to-score, dopamine-inducing panache that basketball provides. It's by far the simplest game on the list, but it feels like it outlines the fundamentals of what makes a basketball game great. Let it be known that I tried, but throughout all my researching, I still couldn't find a game better from the next era than NBA Jam. Yes, Tournament Edition is a better game, but I'll be choosing the original for style, simplicity, and that this is what initially took the arcades by storm. Jam is a game that slices away even the regular rules of basketball to make its barrier to entry more manageable. There are no out-of-bounds, no fouls, no backcourt violations, just two teams trying to get a ball in a basket. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, the Canadian government ran a series of historical shorts to be placed in commercial breaks broadcasting, known as Heritage Minutes. In one of them, it shows Ontarian James Naismith and his college students of Springfield, Massachusetts, inventing basketball in 1891. "If we can't carry the ball, how are we supposed to get a good shot at the peach basket?" laughs a student. "Alright, well, maybe we can carry it a couple steps," concedes Naismith. The way we see modern sports is interesting. In most places, they are a sacred cow perfectly conceived with no modern flaw or iteration needed. I have no gripes with how modern basketball is played, and those who have crafted the modern competitive rules have much more experience on the sport than I do. But it's worth noting that even up to the 2000s, rules on things like time to pass for midcourt line were being changed to make the game more competitive and enjoyable. Much like how chess was improved upon and modernized over hundreds of years, however, its intention of strategy and unique piece movement has always stayed the same. The Heritage Minute, while perhaps a little bit exaggerated, shows the professor iterating the game for the new players to understand it better and have more fun with it. NBA Jam moves backward from the competitive rules to level the playing field and make it more accessible. What NBA Jam wisely does not simplify is the attributes of its players. Giving different teams different abilities and dunk animations, it gives personality to the players and methods to experiment around with. Whether you're a basketball fan who knows the athletes or not, it's a great addition to keep the game fresh. Controls are still incredibly simple, but I find it quite humorous that aside from your pass and shoot button, the third is labeled Turbo. It's just a name of a button brought over from its arcade roots, but I think it's rather fitting that these athletes with such larger-than-life talent have such hyperbolic phrases for these actions. There's been the argument that when everyone's super, no one will be. When the average height of an NBA player is 6'6", and everyone can constantly shoot well, it makes them not so special when you see them on a broadcast. The solution to this problem appears to make them more super. Jams are as figuratively the name of the game as they are literal. Pushes are comically expressive, and full-court shots frequently are valid. The natural accessibility of how basketball is as a sport also plays into the favor of NBA Jam, and basketball as a whole. The court, compared to other athletic arenas, takes up less space than something like a football field or a baseball diamond. This allows for more spectators to be closer to the action, and for this reason it has a much more personal feeling. On top of this, players are more recognizable due to their lack of padding compared to a game like hockey, and instead of seeing someone bundled up, or even far away like in soccer, you have a better courtside perspective of the individual players. It's to this advantage that NBA Jam has some really nice looking sprites to depict the players included. The pick up and play nature of the title makes for a game that's so easily understandable, and the action of the sport lends so well to the quick-paced games. Where other sports have long points in between points or goals scored, baskets are scored within seconds of the ball being thrown into play. Add to this the ease of performing a flashy boom shakalaka slam, and it's easy to see why the game creates a feeling of excitement. As a guy named Charles Barkley once said, "If you can't slam with the best, then jam with the rest." This game succeeds so well because anyone can slam, and anyone can jam. Most of my decisions of this list were based on research into sports history and a bit of personal hunches. However, when I went into a retro game store and described this project, I was open to suggestions and feedback. I at first gravitated to the 5th generation of consoles, parsing my options, considering NBA Live both a staple 3D game with easier difficulty and very influential additions. No, said the clerk. You're gonna want to go with 2K. That was the game changer. Although I still don't have a large list of sports games in my repertoire, 1999's NBA 2K by Sega Sports and Visual Concepts feels like the first major step to what you would see as a modern basketball game. The first of these similarities comes with it being an absolute data hog. There are 200 blocks of save data on my Dreamcast memory card, and NBA 2K required all of them. It goes to show that this is a common trend that a lot of sports games struggle with, almost due to their nature. In order to simulate real life as best as possible, there is an obsession for the developers to create the most realistic looking game and include the most accurate data and statistics. The 2K games are some of the most graphically impressive games I have ever seen on their respective consoles, with incredible audio as well to back it up. But sacrificing my save data for all the games on my Dreamcast was a hard pill to swallow, and the download size of modern games is also a put-off that I'm sure is something that prevents people from giving these games a try. Going into the gameplay of NBA 2K, however, is something that shows absolute polish. In the 16-bit era, sports gaming was synonymous with playing on the Sega Genesis, and Sega put the whole hardware of the Dreamcast to excellent use. Frame rate is incredibly smooth, and along with this, so are the movements of animations of the players for the time. There are some slight hiccups specifically with the notoriously questionable free throw mechanic, but overall, everything plays as one would expect. Instead of inventing many new concepts, it borrows those that NBA Live had created over the past 3 years and leapfrogs over them. As NBA 2K20 was the first basketball game I really played, it was interesting that 20 years earlier, there was a game that played pretty much the same fundamentally. To some genres, this is not so monumentous. One could say that a Call of Duty game doesn't change very thoroughly. However, it's upon pivotal installments that it sets the trend for the rest of the game genre. To those familiar with the franchise, it's the game engine overhaul and thematic direction that made Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare an incredible leap above Call of Duty 3. Where Call of Duty took 4 mainline games to create its golden formula to leave the competition in the dust, NBA 2K makes that standard in its first attempt, by threading the needle of selling players with its presentation while creating a more in-depth simulation. It coaxed those interested parties to give the franchise a shot, and educate to a higher skill ceiling due to its easy-to-transfer literacy. In moving to simulation, however, this is where we can lose some people. While controls are still relatively simple from the base level, 2K feels like a basketball game for those who know how to play basketball. 2K is a game about probabilities, depending on a position, shot timing, and player skill to the type of shot being made, those probabilities will increase or decrease for getting a basket. Players perform like they did in that era, so depending on who has the ball, you'll get very different results in an attempt to do something like shoot threes. Thankfully, I had Vince Carter on the Toronto Raptors, and true to his reputation, his dunks could carry my team to victory. But consider if I didn't know that, and I was handed a controller by a friend. A lack of experience on both ball literacy and statistical knowledge would make this gameplay much harder to interpret, and sadly in this first installment, no visual aid is easily available during play, save for when you go to the practice court. However, that is something that one could argue naturally comes with understanding what works and what doesn't. I didn't have a guide or do much training in 2K20, and so for hours I played against matches with AI and slowly felt my way through to success. The same happened here. At first, the free throw concept was a bizarre and arcane thing to me. However, with practice of the concept, I was adequate in doing them. Another method of the simulation is what you can do off the court. NBA 2K gives you the ability to simulate sports, in which statistical matchups of each player equates to wins or losses. You have the ability to manipulate and trade teams, in hopes to get desired results pulling the strings for these teams. As 2K would evolve, this would change its name from Association to My League, and for some, this is where a bulk of their time is spent tinkering away. While I can respect those who partake, it's something that I feel needs a more fundamental knowledge of the sport and players at the time. I would also argue that fantasy sports is something that's not exactly exclusive to basketball, so that being said, I hope this doesn't offend anyone that I exclude it, and here's a good old-fashioned Canadian sorry. While perhaps 2K's most historically important basketball game in terms of what it accomplished and what it would establish, it fits in a place that comes with me hesitant to recommend it for nothing more than the fact that this formula would be improved upon. If you're trying to get into basketball, there are many greater iterations of this formula further down the path that the original 2K paved. If you want to start here, however, you can still have a very good time. While tunneling through the history of a sports genre to see how I would be able to appreciate these games and relay their intention, I didn't expect to intersect with a game developer tunneling in my direction with the same question. EA Sports Big was a team set up to make bold new sports games, but its Vancouver developers were not very well versed in basketball. It was, however, their openness to understand street ball and sell this understanding to basketball fans and non-basketball fans alike that makes NBA Streets Volume 2 a game that's so fondly remembered. While director Will Moselle would lead the team from the first NBA Street game, everyone else on the project was new either to development or sports game development entirely. It was with this freshness that a learned appreciation and perspective was made to refine the solid roots that made NBA Street. To make a good playing basketball game was to give the same energy that could be found in things like Nike's Freestyle commercial. Interestingly, the name Volume 2 invokes the same nature of the And One mixtapes that were incredibly influential at the time, giving an even broader spotlight to basketball culture. NBA Streets Volume 2 complements this culture by bringing its professional team members to have the best of both worlds. Mix this with the absolutely flavorful commentary of Bobito Garcia, and you have an absolute vibe of energetic pizzazz of the sincerest authenticity. Streets approaches arcade gameplay similar to NBA Jam, but to call it rehashing with a modern coat of paint, or even a successor of some kind, would be limiting what arcade style of basketball can be as a genre. The games are done in 3-on-3 with extra points given for style on the court. Much of the more technical rules are pushed to the side for the sake of enjoyment, and successful shots and dunks are lovingly animated to make point scoring incredibly satisfying. As a sports newbie, I was quite appreciative of the easy access to the Street School tutorial, but the thing that really helped me was how the game telegraphed the chances of my shot going in. Underneath the player you control, there are red, yellow, and green icons that will determine the likelihood of your shot going in, so wherever you are on the court, you can understand the ability of your players. The main goal is, of course, then placing your team to areas where they're more likely to make the shot successfully, or deciding to throw caution to the wind and shoot for the chance anyway. Whereas a more experienced basketball player would know when to take the best shot based on the positioning and openness of other players, this visual aid is a godsend and a clear confirmation from the game to provide feedback to where you stand currently with the ball. NBA Streets is another case against looking away at sports games as always the same. Here we have a title that uses the same basic rules, but with its game feel, art style, and song choices, it provides an atmosphere that's a lot more becoming for new players of the genre to be attracted to. If you don't know anyone's names in basketball, Street has you covered, with its Become a Legend mode chock full of RPG-like progression and team building. Street creates its own fictional characters as players on the court and fictional bosses, so there's no barrier of knowledge knowing players. It's not needing to adhere to any simulation or sports season, so Street Volume 2 can be as flippant as it wants with its concepts of time, human ability, or even the rules of basketball with the game breaker shots. Consider something like 1996's Space Jam. It's a film that takes basketball to literally cartoonish levels, and yet successfully captivates sports fans and those who have never set foot on a court. Its presentation reframes a game that people would write off in normal circumstances by providing another angle to what sports can be seen as. NBA Streets Volume 2 also reframes the expected presentation to a very different energy. In this way, not only does it succeed in proving that the genre is more than a one-trick pony, but it also begs the question to how many more sports fans there would be with more thematic diversity to the genre. I honestly thought when I got to NBA 2K11 that I would be comfortably fatigued after playing so many sports games back to back. On paper, I knew what would be added. I knew that the gameplay would be a bridge between 2K from the Dreamcast and my last picks. I knew that 2K11's subsequent entries would be considered a golden age for 2K sports, and so I wanted to start where this golden age began. I was ready for a good time, but not anything I wasn't expecting. When you first start the game, you are thrust into your first match automatically. It's Game 1 of the 1991 championship final. The music is swelling, the crowds are cheering with electrifying vigor. You are the Chicago Bulls, headed by number 23, Michael Jordan. You're playing against the LA Lakers with their own champion and Dream Team member Magic Johnson. The only thing that comes before you this is the following lines about MJ. He took flight, he rose above all. He changed the game and became a legend. What will you achieve? The ability of the team is impressive and the stakes are high in this digital moment, but NBA 2K11 plays up this introduction to an even greater level. Historically, the Bulls lost this game 93-91. By starting here, the game is then asking you, in this situation where you're expected to fail, can you rewrite history? What will you achieve? To a Verse 2K player, this is an opportunity to prove your experience. But to someone who is only consistently a winner in rookie difficulty, this was a statement of challenge and an opportunity to prove yourself. I got completely destroyed. But in the end of the game, Jordan was the one who scored a majority of the points. Even in opportunities where I probably shouldn't have gotten a basket, the sheer stat ability of this character gave me an opportunity to do better than I normally could. There are a lot of titles that put you in the shoes of a hero at the start of the game. It's a great way of priming the player to what they'll become, either from the abilities that the gameplay allows, or in a thematic element that, while still remaining simple, is understandable. Seldom, however, do games assume you have the player skill to match the difficulty that those veteran talents have. In the introduction, I fell short of achieving greatness, but it lit a fire under me to learn to get better. I could have switched the modes back to a winnable rookie, but I wanted to learn to play pro. This game encouraged me to do that. Aside from the regular fixings of an NBA 2K game, 2K11's main draw point comes from its Become a Legend mode, in which you play some of the most iconic games in Jordan's career. To Michael Jordan superfans, this is a great Hall of Fame point to see some of his best moments. But what value does it have to someone who's trying to get into sports in general? History is an interesting thing when it comes to being done in video games. Although education of something that happened is one of the priorities, it's usually eclipsed by the need or want of making the game more fun or player-friendly. This can absolutely vary depending on what is attempted to be taught, but video games, more than books or even film, can tend to sidestep the intention for a more enthralling experience. Sports games have an advantage in this area. By simulating a player's ability in that historical point, it gives a perspective as to what the difficulty is in that snapshot. In every basketball game I played so far, scoring 69 points is still a challenge to undertake. Scoring 69 points as one player alone is something that feels like an absurdity. And in attempting to replicate this achievement, an even greater appreciation is naturally given for someone who can pull off such a feat. Before I started to look more critically into sports players, they were just names at best. MJ in my mind was depicted as the smiling everyman athlete from his films and TV commercials. It's all the more interesting when you see that these superstars are of course much more complicated than these just-like-me depictions. Before playing 2K11, I watched through the documentary series The Last Dance, and in its candidness, it paints a great, if not slightly biased picture of how Jordan was a titan not just as a player, but a cultural icon. He's painted as a flawed protagonist, but his dedication to improvement and obsession with competition made for a player that nobody can look at without admiration of how well he played the game. I think a pitfall of learning to appreciate sports is we look from a surface level to see what's in front of us. A group of men or women running down a court and shooting a ball into a hoop. With limited experiences, we write off the difficult aspects or appreciate what they are doing, but never think about how we ourselves would do it. Passion births contagious excitement, and the more you see of that passion in a player, on or off the court, the more human they become. The goal between the athletes is shared, but to discount them as vehicles to score points discredits what it took to get where they are and how it impacts them on a daily level. While NBA 2K doesn't feature such anthropological looks on its athletes, it starts by highlighting a single person and dwells on their career as more than just another member in a roster of characters. It's an interesting thing that in order to appreciate these larger-than-life legends, we also need to shrink them back down and see them as people. Another thing that NBA 2K11 brings to the table with its help of Become a Legend mode is the addition of certain legacy teams from the past. Although it's the start of something that would be expanded upon in later 2K games, legacy teams are something that are a great way for new or out-of-touch players to relate to. Sports teams have a ship of Theseus nature to them, and especially when playing through multiple sports games, it's always good to see familiar faces when you don't know a particular season. Some may be perfectly content with choosing their home team. The jerseys and home court can be a nice sort of comfort. For me, I took a look at the Raptors, didn't know a single player, and noped back into the Chicago Bulls after one game. I knew Pippen, I knew Grant, I knew Jordan. And for a game where understanding general strengths is a greatly beneficial thing, it's good to have a comfort food team. Although a few of these features are carried over from previous iterations, I still greatly appreciated the variety on display in 2K11. Blacktop was here if I felt like playing street ball with celebrity players to boot. My player was available for creating a new athlete and slowly training them to be ready for the NBA. I also found it really interesting that my passing would be intercepted a lot more from what seemed to be a substantial AI improvement. One not so appreciated aspect is the product placement that had started to become so permeated in the 2K franchise, all the way back to the PlayStation 2 era. Although nothing is changing how the game plays, its intrusion feels questionable. Product placement is a reality that almost every sport now faces, and in some ways it just feels like part of the furniture. While its exclusion would be a nice thing in some places, it becomes more complicated when these brands have tied themselves so deeply with the athletes that endorse them. Upon winning in certain games, you're bestowed with a pair of Jordan shoes, and these shoes then give you a stat boost. The interesting conundrum is that these are real products that you can go and purchase. For clearing a difficult challenge, I was rewarded with an advertisement of sorts. an advertisement that Jordan fans knowingly love and appreciate. Despite trying to keep an open mind to it, I'm incredibly indifferent about shoes and fashion. It sadly didn't grab me in this moment the way that basketball has. However, for those who do appreciate Air Jordans, there's an impressive history, status, and entire subculture surrounding them. To have something that encompasses a celebration of Jordan would actually be cheapened if the shoes were also not included. And so to wholesale say that Game's product placement is not warranted would be too extreme of a take. To many, collecting pairs of J's is not a financially viable thing, to say nothing of the fortune it would cost to have vintage pairs. In the 2002 film Like Mike, 13-year-old Calvin Cambridge finds a pair of Magic sneakers owned by Michael Jordan that enhances his basketball ability to play in the NBA. It's a fun family movie in which a young boy feels empowered by a pair of lightning-struck shoes. It's an entertaining fantasy for kids and adults alike who have had dreams of being like Jordan.
But man, I wanted to be like Mike. You know what I mean?
2K11's edition of shoes feel more interested in celebrating the fantasy not only of just being Jordan as a person, but also having Jordans on your feet. The complicated piece here then will be where to draw the line, and that will be different for every player. I don't care to be an apologist for Gatorade just because a good commercial was made promoting the brand, but I would say I'd be lying if I excused it a little bit more while playing 2K11 due to its natural fit with its brand affiliate. Considering, however, how Jordan's endorsement helped open the floodgates for sugary sports drinks to become synonymous with athleticism, and the nostalgic goggles start to slide off. Gatorade does not make the game better, like Air Jordans do. They have nothing to say about design or athletics other than to misinform about positive health options. At its best, in 2K11, it's an unnecessary element that only feels natural because of the real-world marketing. At its worst, it opens the floodgates to see how it can take up more screen real estate with the excuse of, well, that's how professional basketball is too. As I mentioned before, I didn't come into NBA 2K11 expecting anything that I didn't know about. But it's not until I started up the game that my predispositions of what I thought I would feel melted away. There was no point where I felt like there was a misstep in the design of 2K11, even while I knew that there was more to come in terms of features and quality of life improvements. I was not disappointed with what it lacked, but what it was pointing towards. While there are a lot of controversial components that the franchise would later bring, 2K11 harkens back to a point where basketball and sports games in general were less hungry for monetization, a time where nothing looked bleak. One of the most common criticisms from a casual player is that the games barely change anything from entry to entry, and yet still charge full price for their next installment. To those more die-hard in the genre or play only sports games, they see this as a yearly splurge in which they may invest hundreds of hours into an annual game. After all, if the game keeps you entertained all year, is it not worth it? Nevertheless, when it comes to what a development team can do in a year, the results can often be lackluster. Something needed to be done to make these yearly releases have more content than just an improvement in fidelity and roster. The answer to this would be story. What better way to have a library of yearly releases than for them all to have memorable interactive elements? In this way, each yearly installment would have its own journey worth investing time and money into. I saw a lot of differing opinions as to which game to play with the best story, and it came down to 3 options. I chose 2K16 for a couple reasons. Not only is this one of the fan favorites of the series, but its most prominent feature is that the story is written and directed by acclaimed filmmaker and basketball fan Spike Lee. In the introductory cutscene, Spike greets you with the following lines. There's a lot more to being a great baller than what you can see on the court. High school, college, choosing an agent, getting drafted, developing a personal brand, and family. Step into my world, where you can be the story. Not having first-hand experience of Spike Lee's films, I took time to remedy this by watching Lee's most famous basketball picture, 1998's He Got Game. I'm really glad I did, as not only is this story hearkening to it, but it feels like an incomplete experience without seeing it. In tying 2K16's story Livin' the Dream to He Got Game, it reaps the benefits of riffing off of the film, but also traps itself in doing so. The story follows your player character Frequency Vibrations, also known as Freak, as he goes on a journey from high school to a full NBA career. He lives in the projects of New York similar to the main character Jesus in He Got Game. The first goal of your career is to pick a college, while playing your high school games to the encouragement of your family and friend Vic. As you play the games, you'll be approached by multiple colleges for scholarships until a choice is made on which to join. This is honestly a moment where 2K16's story stumbles, not in what it presents, but what it sets you to expect. There are two choices that will affect Livin' the Dream cinematics, and this is one of them. But it's a choice that is almost right off the bat, and so it gives you the perception that you will have much more agency than you actually have, with the promise that you can be the story. This moment sounds a whole lot like that fulfillment. 2K Sports worked with the individual post-secondary institutions to feature American college players in arenas of 2015. The choice is impactful and very welcome. I don't know a darn thing about college basketball teams, but I can appreciate that this means a lot to basketball fans. And that if famous commentator Dick Vitale can be believed, it is in fact awesome, baby. The change from high school to college really does feel like Freak is moving up in the basketball world through the presentation alone. Where once the PA system interrupts the game to give school messages, it is now replaced by the sound of the college band interluding until the next point where the ball's in play. Crowds multiply, UI changes, good performing teammates from high school join college teams, and with each game, there is a measure of importance that each match has to keep you motivated. The servers for 2K16 are offline now, so there's no way of increasing your player score before making it to the NBA. However, I didn't really mind the level that much throughout my experience at the beginning. Freak was a playmaker, but his ineptitude in shooting made sense as he was a high school student and a college student. Yes, he wasn't very good, but neither were the majority of his high school players, and a fair amount of the college players. When I finally got to the professional league, I was a bit greener than I wanted. I couldn't shoot, but at least I could run and pass well enough to find opportunities to still make a good player score, and have enough attributes to level my character every game. Another one of the connections to He Got Game is the character of Dom Pagnotti. In the film, Pagnotti is a fast-talking agent who becomes one of the temptations of Ray Allen's character Jesus, to sign to the NBA and bypass college. In Livin' the Dream, Pagnotti also appears in the story, speaking lines verbatim from He Got Game. In his first cutscene, he's incentivizing you to sign to the NBA after your first year of college. It's a scene that invokes the same tension that instead of denying, Freak chooses to accept and play out a universe where Dom is the money talker on his shoulder. It adds some stakes along with the suspicion that Freak's girlfriend Yvette also shares the cutscene and might have the same aspirations of what plays out in the film. Almost all the need-to-know components are within the game cutscenes, but they twist differently knowing that this is a road that was tread before in another story, and where in some places Jesus succeeds or fails, Freak might be taking the opposite choice. The problem is that this is Freak's choice. As the cutscene goes, Pagnotti, family, and friends urge your avatar to make a decision, and in the end, Freak is the one who makes the decision off camera. It felt as though this may have been an option at one point, but I couldn't be sure. As the next cutscene rolled along, Freak was the one choosing the pivotal decisions. I was not. Where I did have agency, however, was my performance. Upon playing well enough, I found myself as a modest pick in the NBA draft through wins and team playing. Not bad for an overall level 55 player. Game results don't really affect the cutscenes, and even if you are performing terribly, the commentators will banter about how previous games, Freak was doing well to emphasize if you do fail, they'll just give it a pass. It's a bit of a training wheel solution, but it stabilizes the narrative to still make sense as to why Freak is a formidable enough figure in the NBA. At the end of the day, I was still rewarded with more attribute points for playing well, and up to this point, the games were also affecting my placing and ability in the NBA. There's still a good portion of sports gamers who simply skip through all the cutscenes to get to the basketball part. Doing this rewards them accordingly. The next 8 games have small significant importances, but the overall conflict for the rest of Living the Dream is Freak's relationship primarily with that of his best friend Vic. He takes advantage of Freak in almost every aspect, but Freak still accepts him as part of his family. The main conflict of He Got Game is the relationship between Jesus and his father Jake. In order to have his prison sentence for manslaughter of his wife lessened, Jake must convince Jesus to join a college from a state he is incarcerated in. In every other part of Jesus' life, others wish to sway his selection for their own benefit, and Jake is also guilty of this. The element that makes Jake different is that despite his agenda, he more deeply desires to be in a supportive relationship with his son and his life. 2K16 looks to see a similar conflict from a different angle, to a relationship where selfishness interferes with support, where the good qualities are overshadowed by the negatives. As you can guess, it doesn't sing as sweetly. In a cutscene with Freak's team owner, he stresses that Vic has become too much of a problem and a distraction for Freak, and that it's impacting his team's image and tarnishing his own ability to make practices. Freak responds with an anecdote of when Vic and him were young and would fantasize making it to the NBA. Mimicking the childhood introduction to their dreams, he can still hear the imaginary crowd. This fantasy of the dream is still tangible to him as the reality he lives in now. In both worlds, he sees this picture of life lacking without Vic. Where Freak sees this dream about basketball, Vic sees this dream as the life that basketball provides. Vic proudly and constantly labels himself as a friend of Freak, but those relations come as a tool to live his dream. One that is not better with Freak, but cannot be supported without his patronage. His ambition is to live life to his benefit, but it excludes the consideration of how it will negatively impact Freak. The culmination of this conflict comes from the inescapable confines of Freak's car. Wearing a comically bulbous Friend of Freak hat, Vic asks for money to start a music career. Freak deflects the conversation to recall memories of playing basketball in school, and for a moment, things are back as they used to be. Vic returns to the conversation about his music career, first starting with guilt, then insults, and when all else fails, blackmail. It's an intentionally long, arduous cutscene, but its motion capture and voice acting sell it incredibly well. When faced with all he's done wrong, Vic still cannot express an apology for his behavior. And for most players, this is where the goodwill for him will be lost. The next cutscene has your surrounding business partners all pleading with you to drop Vic, and it ends with them quite plainly asking Freak to drop him or leave the team. Much like the choice to the NBA, there isn't actually one. An off-screen decision is made, you're a free agent, and Freak still keeps contact with Vic. Ironically, this is where the second decision is made. You have the option to negotiate contracts with the NBA teams. Being a sports doofus when it comes to anything before 2020, I stayed with the Cleveland Cavaliers because I knew who LeBron James was. It was a rather pleasant surprise to not only manage a better attribute salary to level faster, but to later learn that I had stumbled onto the 2016 championship team. The negotiation is fun, but the proximity to the choice that you can't make sours the moment. The moment of Freak's celebration into signing is also made bitter with a phone call that Vic had died in a car chase. It's implied later that Vic intentionally was reckless and suicidal, and it was probably left vague to preserve the game's E10 rating on the ESRB. It's a touching moment nevertheless. Death is less about the experience of those gone, it's about the impact to the living and the loss it creates. For Freak, this is a conflict without closure, and a part of the dream he desperately tried to keep that he'll never be able to get back. The story ends with Freak and his sister returning to their parents' apartment in the projects to buy them a house. and as they leave the court they started the story in, the ghost of Vic presents a letter written to Freak. It's emotional, it's apologetic, and Vic writes all his frustrations of growing up without parents and being thankful for Freak and his family. It works, but only if you take it out of context of the whole story. Victor's last words try to make him a likable character and more sympathetic. He is the result of a tragic childhood. However, he also distracts from reflecting on his own behavior, never trying to change by focusing on the people in Freak's life. As he bequeaths to Freak a final moral to treat others as humans and remember him as loving, it rings hollow from the constant offender of a parasitic relationship. The story is just a primer for the rest of the My Career experience, but it does a good job ramping you up and making your entrance to the NBA look like a success story. Perhaps it's due to the mythical intros, but it reminded me a lot of Guitar Hero 3, playing first in less glamorous venues to becoming the best of the best, all the while being supported by a colorful cast. Living the Dream isn't perfect by any means, but I'm glad I played it. The narrative is not as good as a film, but it doesn't need to be. It's the combination of game and cinematic that gives these interactions something to move towards, beyond just another match. And in the end, it's got some incredibly fun basketball to focus on. Certain cutscenes and characters were less than polished, but they all did serve a purpose. Cutscenes didn't take advantage of the medium, and I imagine it's because of the influence of the filmmaker at play to tell a linear narrative. I suppose I give it a bit of a pass because I knew that the other stories would fix this later. Or they would, until they didn't. I mentioned before that I had 3 options for stories that I would choose, and my first option was actually 2K19, and its unique narrative of not being NBA worthy, but making your way back. Servers for 2K games usually shut down after 2 years' time. For those who spent money creating a character or buying cosmetics, those are erased and removed in order to shoo players away to the next release. However, since 2K18, story modes have been removed once the servers shut down. If you go to 2K19, you can only create a player without a story, and in 2K20, the entire My Career is unplayable. These are the best-selling NBA 2K games, and they're husks of their original experiences that originally had a story. If you don't see how ludicrous this practice is to the consumer, consider being one of the developers or actors who worked hard on an annual My Career experience just to see it deemed disposable within 2 years. At the time of this writing, the 3DS and Wii U eShops had recently closed, and with them, the only means to buy exclusive digital games from their respective consoles. It was a large blow for those who advocate video game preservation that would show how some material could no longer be accessible for future generations to play. Perhaps it was before my time, but it just baffles me that the gaming community and game journalists aren't up in arms that this practice is continued. A part of me thinks it's because they see them as just yearly sports games. Stories like Living the Dream show that they're more than just the same game every year. With this project, I've had the luxury of going through some of the best basketball games ever made for my research. However, there's still one space that I hadn't looked at. In fact, there was a whole aspect of the game I hadn't touched intentionally because I knew it would be trouble. Thankfully, I was able to avoid it due to 2K's servers having a very brief shelf life, but it would be remiss not to try it. To hide from the modern NBA 2K franchise would not only paint an incomplete picture, but on the brighter side, it would fail to highlight the things that the current 2K basketball does so well. With all this in mind, I booted up NBA 2K23 on the PS5. I started with a high point. Coincidentally to this video, the most modern version of NBA 2K features a Jordan challenge much like NBA 2K11. And it's still incredibly good. Although it follows close to what 11 did 2 console generations or a decade back, the Jordan Challenge not only hopes to retell history in its events, but also invoke the feeling of the era. Before you play a significant match in the Jordan Challenge, there'll be interviews about the game and MJ's career. Afterwards, you'll be playing in the same old arenas decked out with retro filters and HUD that bring back the player to the time. On top of the usual informative and spot-on commentary, it was an absolute treat to try my hand at scoring these Jordan objectives. One thing that was lacking, however, was the introduction. 2K11's Cold Open game is now one of my favorite openings in any game, period. It encompasses the challenge of the game, makes you feel like a powerhouse upon startup, and gives you an instant target goal to achieve victory. Upon starting the Jordan Challenge in 2K23, you begin with a QuickTime event and then a highlight reel of the athlete. It celebrates Michael Jordan's career, but it doesn't share that moment to the empowerment of the player to make it feel important. As well, in the 1989 moment of Michael's buzzer-winning shot, the event is portrayed in 2 poorly tutorialized QuickTime events. Upon completing this, you are treated to Michael's iconic jump of celebration and rewarded with all 3 challenge points. I didn't earn this. There was no emotional connection here, and this tight game had no tension because I didn't partake in the story. I simply watched the ending. For contrast, consider the Shrug Challenge. The story goes that as the Bulls went into the finals, many were considering Clyde Drexler as the best in the league. Out of pure competitive spite, Michael Jordan went out to score 35 points in the first half, including 6 3-point shots, something he had a 27% average in shooting. All the while, the Bulls held Drexler under 17 points. Your goal is to make that feat happen. It's hard, but when it's done, it gives you the satisfaction of gloating. It gives you the better understanding of how someone like MJ was a living, breathing cheat code. Go ahead. Shrug. While I still adored the mode overall, these QuickTime events are the one thing that seemed jarringly out of place, and brought out the worst of the medium when such better alternatives existed. Which brings us to my career. It will likely surprise very few who are aware of the publisher Take-Two and their monetization practices that this is a title that wants your money, even after paying full price. I played a lot of cash-hungry games before, but I didn't expect the bevy of ways that my career attempts to sabotage its own fun factor in order to squeeze out a few more dollars from its players. As you make your character, you will be tasked with setting the max stat level. It's a glimpse of what you want to be, but in other respects, it's a snare to what this character could be and what it will be limited to. Overall power level 99 was obviously too good to be true, and of course this will be adjusted once the story starts, but how bad could it be? Starting the story, you're placed in a perplexing situation of being both apparently very good, but also very unpopular. Despite being a star college player selected for the NBA draft, a vast majority of fans would have preferred your cocky rival in the spot. You are the 18th choice, which isn't very high at all, and yet the game wants you to feel like the entire league knows and cares about the character of MP. The story has some okay cutscenes, especially on the current generation of consoles, but of course there are still some moments of fluff where the dialogue can be much better. Most of MP's male colleagues usually have 2 modes. Either they think MP is the best thing since sliced bread, or he'll get berated by sympathizers of your rival in a Saturday morning cartoon fashion. However, there are still good performances done by the supporting cast, specifically from your social media manager Ashley and your GM Othello when he is in the picture. While it's welcoming to get right into the action of the NBA, the unspoken tension from the gameplay is to make you feel like an imposter. You don't belong here. And while it would be acceptable in a minor or school league, not a single player in the NBA is at your rating even after hours of grinding levels. The problem is that I was trash, but it wasn't because I was playing poorly, or at least in a figurative way. While ordinary NBA players are somewhere between the 75 to 85 range, my rating was comically low. So despite my role as a shooter for the team, my character couldn't dependably land a shot, and I was usually too slow to defend effectively. I started to have this angry feeling anytime I messed up, because I couldn't determine if it was me messing up or the game nudging me to have a better level. If my player was a bit more capable, those ratings would go up. If my ratings went up, my player would help win more matches. If I won more matches, those digital fans in the story would like me. I would be in the starting lineup. I could outplay my rival. If only I had more virtual currency to level up. This becomes more pressuring since the game's narrative will constantly breathe down your neck to be better. Prove your rival wrong. Prove his fans wrong. Prove your general manager wrong. In one cutscene, your girlfriend, who is also your business manager, gives you these encouraging words. If you want it, fight for it. If you have anything left in the tank, it's time to give it. I've seen you overcome impossible odds, MP. Have you forgotten about college already? It comes to the point where I can't tell if the game is intentionally trying to dig the knife deeper to spend money and level up, or just have an intentional moment in the story. To answer her question, yes, I had forgotten about college, because tucked away in flashback side quests were the college games, with better written stories about MP and friends. People in this era don't treat him like a big shot, and that makes MP's character much more interesting, and exchanges feel far less wooden. I would have probably missed it entirely if my friend hadn't told me about them. The game felt unfair, so I simply gave up playing the career before I even got there. It's a shame too, because it has a lot of decisions you can make, something that I desperately wanted in Living the Dream. When I've looked online, I've seen a lot of resentment for the My Career story, and while a good amount of the criticism is well merited, I think the utter hatred comes not from what the game is, but what it's replacing. By shutting down servers with better stories, every new game has to not only be serviceable, but better than the one it arbitrarily sacrificed. If you can escape the first trap to spend real money on VC, you'll probably find yourself wandering around the city. Based on the smaller park iterations and refined since its official launch in 2K22, the city still has some work that needs to be done. When it puts its best foot forward, the city feels like a vibrant basketball theme park with different events and modes to immerse yourself in. It feels like a place that almost everywhere you look, it's a way to celebrate the game and its components that surround it. You can traverse and see where other players ball, shop, and do quests like in a proper basketball MMORPG. It's a move forward to creating a space that incorporates the story, places to socialize, or finding pickup games. Unfortunately, 2K23 City seldom puts its best feet forward, and from the way the avatar controls on its default mode of transportation, it will make you wonder if MP even has any good feet at all. Being a city, there's plenty of space, and the game will suggest that you use a skateboard to get around. The skateboard is bad to control, though. While this can work for many people in the open and empty spaces that the city has, turns and ollies are not in the least bit satisfying. If only it was just bad, I could accept it, at least a bit, but it becomes harder to accept when better vehicles exist. These vehicles, of course, cost VC. Where some parts feel alive and bouncing, others are desolate and empty. Textures can feel strewn and jarringly switch from one to the other. Given the era of development and a rather limited environment staff, you could advocate that this still gets the job done. The problem with that is the constant juxtaposition between good and underbaked areas happening frequently. Add to this online players who pop in out of the blue, and the illusion of this seamless basketball utopia feels more like a B-list online experience. On the previous console generation and PC, players can interact instead on what is known as the Goat Boat, and while it's a bit more limited than the city, the courts are nice and the areas that the player walks around can be varied nevertheless. Having a place to walk around and socialize adds at least an element of potential social experience off the court. The greatest issue of the city is perhaps its nature to discourage newcomers from feeling welcome. Being the scrub that my player was, it was usually hard to jump into a match where others would want to join me for a pickup game. When I wandered to the auto matchmaking theater building, inefficiency of movement and shooting followed me into the multiplayer, but here I was also judged on a social level. Teammates would swear and trash talk about my ability, questioning how I could miss a shot or why I couldn't keep up with the other player faster than me. In these matches, the more useful I was just finding an opening and passing well enough to hopefully get a decent player score. When I first played NBA 2K20, I didn't mind constantly losing. Through my failures, I could tell that I was gradually learning and improving, so that slowly my losses would go from double to single-digit deficits. When you play online with others, there's valuable VC to be earned for the winner. And by stepping in as a low-ranking newbie, you are not only at an extreme disadvantage, but you are also a burden to the other members of your team. In order for them to have better stats and level up, they would need to carry me as well. Trash talk in online games is a given, but this system does nothing to encourage positive behavior or discourage toxic behavior. I can imagine that when these other people saw my low rank, there was an instant disdain. 2K's system doesn't incentivize any kindness to new players, and since it awards you heavily for aspects like shooting more than being a team player, why would you do the latter? This unfiltered matchmaking creates a toxic environment for all players, and while it would be easier to section players based on their overall level, it's far more effective to humiliate them in order to buy the problem away. Another unexpected element was being called out by other players based on my appearance. Fashion, like in many online games, has an important extrinsic value. However, where other games at least separate currency and experience points, NBA 2K has it all in one. So each time you earn money, it's a choice between a cosmetic expression or stat boosting. In 2019, the media website Polygon wrote an article about kids who were given the derogatory title Default due to playing with the default skin in Fortnite. In that game, cosmetic appearance does absolutely nothing to enhance skill, but the term was coined by children to bully perceived new players, or more nefariously, people who didn't have money to spend on cosmetic skins. 2K is worse, in that by not having clothes, you expose that you likely can't afford to level up as well. There is a pressure to conceal your default clothing, as it would not only slightly help you fit in to get matches, but at the same time, it would delay your progression, also making your player more contemptible, and further tempt you to purchase VC instead of playing for it. If the clothing, accessories, and levels were at least cheap in some way, that might make it a little bit more alright. In older titles, VC prices were much lower and easier to come by. From the transition of 2K22 to 2K23, however, the cost to max out your overall level was almost doubled, from 250,000 VC to 460,000 VC. I said it before, but it still bears repeating again. Within a year, there will of course be a new game, and with 2 years, the servers of 2K23 are predicted to close. Neither closet nor player will be transferable to the following game, and so if that is the case, players will be expected to spend $80 to rinse and repeat the same emotionally manipulative cycle. If you follow gaming news but not sports gaming, chances are in 2020 you still saw controversy surrounding NBA 2K20 and its slot machine microtransactions. This was regarding the online My Team mode, in which players amass a collection of basketball players and basketball player accessories. Does paying real money in My Team objectively increase your chances of winning? 100%. To that simple fact, myself and others have steered clear of My Team and modern sports games in general. I didn't want to touch this mode with a 39.5-foot pole. Its reputation preceded it. However, to move along if it didn't exist would be ignorant to how millions of people love and enjoy it, despite its money-siphoning intentions. This genre is commonly known as a gacha, from its capsule vending machine beginnings, and its title fits my career very swimmingly. To give credit where it's due, building a team is easy enough, and earning 80 and low 90 characters did not take as much time as I thought. While I still don't know a majority of popular NBA players, I can say I've played enough sports games now to know a couple. Within about 5 hours, I had an entourage of popular players like Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and Dr. J in my roster. My team also has an expansive amount of modes that you can take on with these teams to earn a multitude of rewards. Perhaps it was playing so many normal games, but triple threat games of 21 were as fun as the court was beautiful. Single player modes are great and help you progress and buff your team. Also, facing bots with better averages always feels satisfying that you got a leg up on the computer. And then you play online multiplayer. There certainly is something to be said about playing against others that is fun and incredibly rewarding. What doesn't feel rewarding is when you pair against a team of high 90 players and you have a definite and impactful disadvantage. It's not fair, and that's the point. By having this multiplayer economy, you will strive to have a team that isn't so easily stomped on, especially when a winning streak reward is dashed by rotten matchups. Even modes like Draft, where you're loaned good cards, are not so much there to be generous, but to give you a taste of what having good player cards would feel like, if you had them. Where a lot of mobile games have a low skill level required, NBA 2K's skill-based gameplay is polished to a T. Because of this, it will attract you to beat the odds with a skill-based play. But when that fails, you will be subtly prompted to improve by getting better cards. General matchmaking is very cruel, where it doesn't try to account for balanced matchups of skills and cards. There's a part of me that wants to stop here and say that if you don't like it, you don't have to play it. I had a lot of fun with my team's single player and the challenges it provided. I was quite comfortable leaving the online part alone, since I'm one who usually doesn't spend money in games like this. The problem is, I'm not everyone, and this isn't one of those mobile games where the product is free to start. This is a game mode made worse to me because the developer wanted to make money, and also where money spent on cards becomes null and void in the following game. There is no virtual slot machine in 2K23, but it might as well still exist. From pachinko to a prize wheel to cracking open player card packs, these all exist to give you a random chance and hope that you'll be blessed with good cards. Sure, I had Michael Jordan, but that was nothing compared to level 99 Jordan. You don't need to purchase card packs with real money, but wouldn't it make that progression process to winning faster? If you choose to grind for good players, doesn't that just mean that you're food for the big fish who spent on having good players? It's sown discontentment that harvests in dividends. According to Sports Business Journal's article in 2022, NBA 2K made up for 65% of Take-Two's revenue. Take-Two's other publishing subsidiaries include mobile juggernaut Zynga and Rockstar Games, famous for their Grand Theft Auto series. The CEO of Take-Two, Strauss Zelnick, also receives bonus stock incentives if certain goals are met for revenue on microtransactions. When NBA 2K is making that much money with these relative factors considered, it doesn't seem like this method of monetization will relent anytime soon. I was mad at this game. Being the only large basketball game series since the departure of NBA Live in 2019, it held a monopoly on the market and was placing hotels and houses to monetize further on the board. These are the main modes in which players will gravitate towards, and if this is the impression that the game makes, it's no wonder why people won't care to try sports games. The kicker is that NBA 2K23 can still be a fantastic game when it wants to be, and you only have to switch modes to see that reality. If you step over to the WNBA, you can see just how much the male-based My Career has been throttled. Your starting player is given far more overall skill points, and so when you are on the court, it really does feel like you have a fighting chance to do well. On top of all of this, your levels go up much faster, so not only will you do well in single player, but you will also play better online. This leads to a better environment and slightly less aggressive conversations. There are also dozens of clothing options to choose from for free, making the expression side more entertaining and making clothing a status problem a non-issue. If all this sounds too good to be true, there are some catches. Women characters have a My Career, but it doesn't mean that they have a story. Yes, it's still nice to have groups go up and play a season with your own character, but having some motivation goes a long way to drive the career forward more than just winning. As much as it's flawed, I also miss the city. It's a hub to meet with players and also go and do activities when you want a break from the court without necessarily leaving the game. The base game is as good as it's ever been. Going into the Eras mode, you're able to play multiple generations of NBA teams and compete in seasons. These games come alongside the filters from the Jordan Challenge mode. Despite being not very good with the Dreamcast 2K, I could also switch gradually to a progressive semi-pro difficulty and have a blast dunking with Vince Carter in the early Toronto Raptors. And for those more experienced than I, AI players and energy meters have changed the game to make it more balanced and yet complex. There are honestly so many features that I could have gone over, and some that I never touched due to their complexity. But in the end of the day, 2K23 is a masterful game that chokes itself with its self-made restraints. It makes the beginning of its most prominent mode an assault on all angles to spend more money, leading you on with a carrot of a mediocre story, and whips you due to not spending enough to make the game more enjoyable in My Team's online. NBA 2K is in the best place it's been in terms of features than it ever has. At the same time, it's hard to enjoy yourself while you feel the hostile incentives of the game looming over you. It's a server that slowly ticks away in obsolescence, and when it dies, it will still be a good basketball game, but the feeling of what it could have been makes these good moments that you've had feel all the more sad. I made this project to see if this fascination was more than just a hometown hype train, or a novelty, and I can happily say I think I'm a pretty casual basketball fan now. In researching for this project, I found documentaries, films, YouTube essays, tons of insightful stories and data, which made me enjoy the games all the more. The goal of this video is not to make everyone a basketball fan, but I hope that it garners enough interest for those who have never played one to give it a try, even if it's an older title. One of my favorite childhood books is about a character who, in a large part of his story, misses out on something he thinks he won't like because of his initial impression. When he tries it, however, he can't not relay his excitement. Despite it being for children, that book still needs to be remembered when you become an adult. Sports video games can be understandable to outsiders. They can have memorable stories. They can have RPG mechanics and quests. Or they can just be a fun distraction with friends. You can play them here or there. You can play them anywhere. You may not like them, so you say. Try them, and you may. Basketball games are fun. Can they be better? I think even die-hard fans will fervently say yes. But each time I finished playing and turned off my consoles, I had a feeling I'd be coming back for my next fix very soon. Hey, thanks for watching this video. This is by far the most ambitious project I've done so far, but I had a blast making it. If you think there was a game you would recommend to a newcomer, please share it in the comments. I hope to make more videos like this for other sports, but I'll be taking a bit of a break into some other topics soon. I also wanted to thank my friend Samir, who helped me with advice and provided some footage for what you saw today. Finally, make sure to subscribe so that you can see when new videos are released. And hey, if you really like what you see, tell a friend about it. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.